So hello everybody and welcome to Kagyu Samye Dzong Edinburgh, albeit not in person, but at least we have technology to help us offer you some Dharma teaching, and this course is the Discovering Buddhism course, which is going to be in 3 parts, so that there's time in between each part for you to think about what we discuss and test it for yourself and also apply it to see is it useful or not. So that's why we've left time in between each one for you to work with. So before we start, it's always good to set our minds in a good way to sort of just let go of the usual worldly preoccupations and focus our minds that we're going to receive something called the Buddha Dharma, as best as I can deliver it anyway. And so we'll say the refuge prayer. Now those of you who are Buddhists already will know the refuge prayer is to when you take refuge with the Buddha, with the Dharma, which is in this context the Buddha's teachings, and with the Sangha, which is the Sangha, there's different ways of defining Sangha, but in this context it means the noble Sangha, those beings who have also reached enlightenment and who are worthy of of taking refuge with. So we're going to say the prayers once in English, and then I'd like to say them twice in the Tibetan phonetics, and we'll have it on screen for you to chant along with me if you would like to. The reason we do it in Tibetan is because this is Kagyu lineage, which is a Tibetan Buddhist school, and so it's this precious lineage that goes back to the time of the Buddha to now. And so when we say it in Tibetan, it's kind of like plugging into the continuity. So that's why we say it in Tibetan, but we'll say it in English first, and then you know what's being said. Okay, so in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the noblest Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the virtue generated by the practice of generosity and other virtues, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. And now in the Tibetan phonetics. O Sanjay Chutang Suji Chonam La Changchu Badu Dani Chapsunji Dagi Jinsoji Pe Sonamji Dola Penche Sanjay Parsho Sanjay Chutang Suji Chonam La Changchu Badu Dani Chapsunji Dagi Jinsu Jipe Sonamji Dula Penche Sanjay de Parsho. And now I'm going to say a short prayer to my precious root guru for his help and guidance. Paden Sawe Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chiwo Pende de Shukla Kachin Chimpo Gone Ji Sungte Kusun Tuchi Ngudrup Sao Tu So. Okay. So, discovering Buddhism. So in this first part, we're going to look at the source. The source of Buddhism is the Buddha. But first I want to just touch on why Buddhism, why bother to discover Buddhism? What is its relevance today? After all, the Buddha was born more than 2,500 years ago. So how is what he taught relevant to today? So the thing is that although if you look around the world, you'll see many different cultures, different customs, different languages, or if you look back in time, you see people dress differently, talk differently, but these are really kind of superficial differences, and really the fundamental nature of beings is the same. Okay, so it expresses itself, it manifests somewhat differently, but those things are quite superficial. So although our lifestyles might be quite different to those of our ancestors or people in different countries, our basic psychological and emotional makeup is really very similar. Now, whereas Western civilization has been largely focused outwards and on improving our lives, the comfort of our lives, and developing material and technological advances to make our life easier and search for satisfaction and sort of answer all our wants, it's often been at great cost to our environment. Whereas the Eastern approach has been more, and particularly that of Buddhism, has been much more to look for the answers to our questions, looking more inwardly at ourselves, at our mind. Because after all, that's through the mind that we experience what we experience, how we live our lives, it's through our mind. So whether we live in Tibet or India or America or Europe, wherever we live, whatever we eat, whether we eat rice and potatoes or whether we eat junk food or whether we eat Michelin star food, whether we ride horses, whether we ride bicycles, jet planes, whatever we do, all of these things are really what we create to make our lives more comfortable, easy. But often, because it's at cost to the environment, it's really ended up polluting our water, the air we breathe, the earth itself, the earth that nourishes us, from which we grow all our plants. So it's really like we've sacrificed our needs in order to service our wants. So that's not the most intelligent way to go. And now, unfortunately, we are kind of experiencing climate change and all the environmental pollution, which of course affects us because we're part of the environment's part of us. Even this situation with the pandemic that we're all undergoing at the moment has got its roots in this. I think, in my opinion, it has its roots in the same problem. So if we're looking at Buddhism, it really has a very different approach. And that's why I think it's so valuable. Because if we want to make our lives better, if we want to be happier, it's not just a matter of having more and more material goods or food or cars or whatever it is, but really of changing our mind, of let's say, taming our mind. If I had to answer the question, well, what is Buddhism? In a nutshell, you could say it's a matter of giving up what's harmful to ourselves and to others, adopting what is helpful to ourselves and others. Now, I think that's probably true of most religions, you could say that, or philosophies, but the third thing is to really tame our minds. And I think that's really the key. Because without that, we don't always know what's good for ourselves. So that's why I think Buddhism is such a precious resource, philosophy, religion, call it what you will, a way of life. So now let's go to the source of Buddhism, which is, of course, the Buddha himself. So as I said, he was born in, not actually India, it was more sort of on the borders of what is now modern-day Nepal, in a place called Lumbini. But just before he was born, when his mother was still pregnant, just to set the scene, his parents were rulers of that area. His father was the king, his mother was the queen. They lived in a very luxurious palace, and it wasn't just a building, it was more like a town. And so everything in there was very, very high-end. And so the queen became pregnant with the prince, who was going to be the prince. He wasn't yet the Buddha, so we can call him the prince in waiting, the Buddha in waiting. And she had many dreams and sort of auspicious signs that kind of led her to think maybe this child that she was expecting was going to be somebody quite special. Shortly after the Buddha was, he wasn't yet the Buddha, the prince was born, his parents took him to see this sage, this seer, to find out, what kind of child they had. He did seem very exceptional, but they thought maybe that was just their own kind of wishful thinking. So, sure enough, when they presented the child to the seer, the sage, he examined the child and he said, "This truly is an exceptional being. And this child is destined to be a very great human being with a lot of influence in the world. But that kind of influence will take one of two directions. It's not clear which direction it will take. So either he will grow up to become a world leader, a world ruler, far outstripping the present king and queen, more like an emperor, with a huge territory and vast influence, or he will become a holy man, a sage, penniless pretty much, not with a lot of wealth or anything, but with huge influence not only in this time but down the ages, and become really a light to help beings, benefit beings. So the king and queen, I think, like most parents, probably would like their children to follow in the family footsteps. And so they didn't quite like the sound of a penniless holy man as much as the world ruler. So they decided that they would kind of engineer it somewhat, that he wouldn't want to become the holy being, that he would want to stay in this palace with all its luxuries and everything that money could buy. And then there would be no reason for him to go out seeking for truth and wisdom and all of that stuff. So that's what they did. They made the palace even more luxurious than ever. They made sure that the Prince Siddhartha, his name was Prince Siddhartha, had everything he could want. And he was a very exceptional child, so as he was growing up, he was really good at everything. And so he was able to develop much more quickly than most normal children. He had the best of everything, the best food, the best clothes, the best education, sports. He was good at sports. He was just so good at everything. I often think that he was a bit like Mozart, and then all the other, one of his cousins who got quite jealous of him because he was so good at everything. And I always felt the cousin Devadatta, who was, well, we'll come to him later, but he was quite jealous of the Buddha. And not the Buddha, sorry, I mustn't call him the Buddha just yet. Incidentally, the word Buddha, it means the awakened one. So this is before the Buddha was the Buddha. This is when he was still a young prince. So as he grew up, he could demonstrate his sporting prowess and his brain. He'd outstrip his teachers. He was also extremely good looking, so he didn't have any problem attracting the ladies. And then as he got a bit older, he did take a wife, and he had this beautiful queen, and I think quite a few consorts as well. And then eventually his queen became pregnant, and they had a son. So everything in the palace was rosy. I mean, he had just everything you could possibly wish for. Except he did get a bit curious about what life was like outside the palace walls. And so one day he arranged with his friend, who was also his chariot driver, said, look, I'd really like to go outside and see what's going on. And his chariot driver knew that the king and queen were not they weren't going to like this idea at all. But then how do you say no to a prince? So he had to kind of do as he was told. But they took precautions. They decided to go when it got dark and most of the people were sleeping, and they wore as plain clothes as they could possibly find. They crept out very quietly, and they went outside the doors into the town, the nearest town. And then Prince Siddhartha was absolutely astonished to see the people, the animals, the life outside, because for the first time he could see people that were old or sick, poor, beggars in rags, animals dying on the street, just the hurly-burly of life outside in all its sort of nitty-gritty, which he'd never seen any of that before. Everyone in the palace was beautiful and beautifully clothed and looked youthful. Suddenly he had the full panoply of human and animal life before him with all its suffering. And he was seriously shocked. I mean, to have gone from one extreme to the other extreme must have been extremely shocking. Anyway, when he went back to the palace, he thought about it, and he couldn't actually get it out of his mind. It kept coming back on him. It sort of made the taste of his luxury feel a bit stale, a bit rotten. He couldn't really enjoy it so much anymore because he knew that there were beings outside who were old and sick and dying and helpless and suffering in many, many ways. And no matter what he did, he could not get rid of that knowledge. I mean, he tried to just carry on with his life, but it just wasn't working for him. And apparently after one night of revelry, where he was, I think, maybe trying to forget about what he'd seen, and it just came to him that no, he couldn't continue in this way. It wasn't possible for him to enjoy this luxury and this life of excess, knowing what he knew. Also, he became full of compassion because what he wanted to know was, is this all this suffering that he saw? Is it a possibility of escaping it? Is there a way to get rid of it? Does it have to be like that? And he wanted to go and study with some teachers, some holy people, that he could try and find the truth of this and get to the bottom of it. Is it possible to escape this suffering? And if so, how? And what could he do? What could he do to help this? So this wasn't just for him, because he actually had what most people would give their arm and leg for. But there was some suffering now for him as well, because of the suffering of others. And so he decided that he had to leave, and that's obviously is not going to be an easy decision, because he had a wife that he loved, had a child that he loved, and of course his parents, and all his friends and cousins, everybody that lived in the palace. He knew he would be saying goodbye to them for he knew not how long. And so that was a very hard decision. And so one night again, under cover of darkness, he went into his wife's room where she was sleeping alongside their child, and he kissed them goodbye. Didn't know when he was going to see them again. He put on the most plain clothes that he could find, and he went out with nothing but literally the clothes he was wearing, not a penny. He walked a little way out of the palace walls, and as soon as he was a little further away, he cut up his hair, because his hair was very luxurious and princely. He shaved it all off, or cut it all off. He had none of his jewels, none of his usual stuff, just plain, so he could blend in with anyone on the street. Now let's just pause for a minute there, because, okay, we're looking at something that happened 2,500 years ago. But just to sort of bring it up to date a bit, imagine a prince in this day and age. Let's say Prince William. Prince William, young man, he's got everything, wife, child, children, in fact. Imagine Prince William leaving the palace under cover of darkness, nobody knows he's gone, and disguised as just any Tom, Dick or Harry, not Harry maybe, and just anonymously going out into the streets, dressed in very poor clothing, probably unrecognizable. How radical that is. Of course, these days, I don't know how long somebody like him would remain anonymous. Probably the paparazzi would be chasing him, even if he tried his hardest. And then what to do if you caught him? People would think, well, what's going on with this Prince William? Has he lost his marbles, or what's going on here? He must have gone crazy. Maybe he needs some counselling, or he would probably be treated as somebody who's gone mad or ill or something like that. So I think it's worth making that comparison, just to bring it up to date, to sort of acknowledge how difficult it must have been and how committed Prince Siddhartha was to leaving all of that behind in order to, I suppose, become a seeker of wisdom and truth for the benefit of beings, to see if it was possible to alleviate their suffering. And so there he was outside the palace, wandering in the streets. He must have begged for his food. He certainly wouldn't have looked like Prince Siddhartha anymore. He would have quite quickly, I would have think, get quite scruffy looking after a few days of walking in the streets, searching for teachers with whom he could learn, from whom he could learn. Sages, holy men, he went in search of them. And sadhus in India, they usually don't have any material goods. They usually have a begging bowl and very little else. And so he would have been like that as he went to study with such people, such sages. But he quite quickly outstripped them. He sort of gleaned what knowledge he could from them, and then still didn't find the answer to his questions of why we suffer. Is it possible to get out of this suffering? They didn't have those answers. And so he would go walk many, many miles to the next person, and he would ask who was the best teachers in the land, the best sages, and he would search them out and study with them and meditate, learned how to meditate and study, contemplate, and he spent his time doing this. And again, he would outstrip the next teacher and the next teacher, and it went on like this. But still couldn't get to the root cause, the bottom of what he was searching for, the answer to his questions. Eventually, he came across a group of ascetics, young men like himself, who were seekers of wisdom and truth. Their idea was to really forego as much of life's necessities as they could possibly do without. So they reduced their food to just a few grains of rice. They were dressed in more or less in just a rag each. And so he joined them, and he thought, well, maybe this is the way, we have to. It was kind of like self-mortification of the flesh. And he spent many, many months with them, meditating and philosophizing, discussing. But because they were eating so little, they got weaker and weaker. And later, when Prince Shakyamuni was enlightened, he referred to this time of when he touched his tummy, he could actually feel his backbone. He was so skeletal. He was just skin, literally skin and bone. Also, when he tried to stand up, he would get dizzy and fall down again. So he began to think, this just isn't the way. I'm losing my strength, even my mental strength. I can't focus so much anymore. I think this is not the way. And he began to eat a little bit. At which point, the other 5 ascetics sort of looked down on him and thought, well, he couldn't hack it. He was a bit of a snowflake, this guy, this Siddhartha. And so he left them, and he wasn't sure what he was going to do. He sat down in a field to contemplate what his next step was, but he did take some food, and so at least he had some strength coming back to him. And as he was sitting in this field, this young woman passed by. She was a shepherdess, and she had this bowl of yogurt, very rich, very nourishing yogurt, and she saw this figure sitting, and she thought there was something about him. He looked sort of quite different, quite exceptional in some way, but she couldn't put a finger on it. But she felt that she wanted to give him this special yogurt. And so she gave it to him, she offered it to Prince Siddhartha, and he accepted it, and he ate it. And he could really feel the strength coming back to him. And after that, he cast the bowl. It was a golden bowl. He cast the bowl into the river. He had no need for the gold, but he did take the yogurt. Later, there are some explanations that this was not an ordinary shepherdess, that this was a woman, we call it like a dakini, somebody, a spiritual person. So anyway, we don't know for sure, but what we do know is that the Buddha, not yet the Buddha, still Prince Shakyamuni, he decided, right, he was going to find somewhere to sit, and he came to this place which we now call Bodh Gaya. He saw this big tree, Bodhi tree, and he thought, right, that's a good place to sit. I'm going to sit down under this tree, and I'm not going to get up until I've got to the root of my questions about suffering. Is it possible to get out of it? And if so, how? And he sat under this big tree, and night started to fall, and he went into meditation, focused, one-pointed, and he sat, and he contemplated, and he really focused his mind, so that whatever other thoughts or temptations occurred to him, he was able to dismiss them, ignore them, and remain one-pointed throughout the night. And as the dawn began to break, he succeeded to not get involved with any thoughts, no matter how tempting they were, whatever food or beautiful women or whatever temptations came into his mind, he was able to just leave it all alone and stay one-pointed. And as the dawn broke, he came to realize the true nature of how things are. Everything, full, omniscient enlightenment. And that's when he became the Buddha. The Buddha means the one who is awoken from the slumber of ignorance, of not really seeing how things are, to waking up to seeing exactly how things are, understanding everything. So then what to do? He pointed at the ground. He pointed at the ground to say, the earth is my witness. There was nobody around. This momentous thing had happened to him, and yet there was no one to witness it. Even if somebody had been there, how could they have known what he'd experienced? And he pointed at the ground as if to say, the earth is my witness. And when we see Buddha statues, they're often in that posture, like the one behind. Actually, it was the right hand. He was in his left hand. He had the bowl in the right hand. He didn't have the bowl at that moment. He had that. The bowl is to symbolize the moment when he was given the special bowl of yogurt, and then when he's pointing at the ground, that's to symbolize or to show the time of when he actually became enlightened. And so, after a while, he was thinking, okay, so how is this going to help? How do I help people? This is, after all, that was his motivation. So he walked off a little way from where he'd been sitting. One can still go to this very place. I've been many times to Bodh Gaya. You can sit under this tree. Even now it has this very quite incredible feeling about this place. It's so holy, so full of sacred energy is the way to describe it maybe. And then he walked up and there's a little hill to one side of it, and he sat on that hill, which of course has now become a holy place as well. And he sat there and he thought about how he was going to benefit beings, how he was going to help them communicate what he knew. And after some time he decided, okay, so he was going to wander, and whoever he came into contact with, he would try to benefit them as much as he could. But of course, you can't, if you're a fully enlightened being, you can't expect everybody to understand that. Even if you could communicate it, how could anybody understand? Everybody is different, they all have their own sort of level of understanding, their own capabilities. He didn't know that everybody has the potential to become fully awakened, but people are at different stages of development, of evolution, if you like, along that path. There's different stages of openness. And so he walked to this place which nowadays is called Varanasi, or Benares, and he went into this, what is now called the Deer Park. It's this very grassy area, beautiful park. And as he was walking along, he could see a little knot of people sitting down, 5 people, and he recognized them to be the ascetics that he used to meditate with and study with. And as they looked up, they saw him coming, and they thought, oh, there's that one that left us before. And at first they were a bit, I'm not so sure if we want to see him. But as he approached, they could see there was something different about him. He was his whole aura was different. He was glowing almost. And he came to them and he sat down with them and he spoke. He gave his first discourse, his first teaching, which came to be known as the 4 Noble Truths. Now, the Buddha knew that not everybody is going to understand his teachings at the same level. And anyway, it was never his idea to spout out all this wisdom that nobody could understand. How is that going to benefit anybody? It has to be commensurate with the person's knowledge, their own understanding, their own abilities and capabilities of where they were at that particular moment when they met, in order to be of benefit. So in other words, it's like if you meet a nursery school child and you meet you can't give them the same lecture that you would give to a postgraduate university professor or somebody like that. I mean, everybody's at different stages. But because he met the first lot of beings that he actually really came into contact with was the 5 ascetics, he knew that they were very intelligent and had done a lot of meditation and were all already very highly developed. So he was able to give them this teaching on the 4 Noble Truths. Now, if we put that in a very kind of broad way, a very simple way, we can say that the first Noble Truth is to acknowledge that life is full of suffering. There's so much suffering. And the second noble truth looks at, well, okay, so what are the causes of this suffering? The third noble truth talks about the cessation of suffering, a way of stopping the suffering or getting out of the suffering. Is it possible? And the third noble truth, and then the fourth noble truth is, yes, the path in which one must follow in order to get out of the suffering. So that's putting it very baldly. But then he went into some detail about it. At which point I'm going to read from this little book here, because I think this is very succinctly put by, this was by the way Ringo Tulku put it. It was a very simple but very succinct way. Of course, it's the Buddha's teaching. So he said the same thing in 3 different ways. He said that there is suffering, there is the cause of suffering, there is the cessation of suffering, and there is the path by which we reach the cessation of suffering. Then he said the same thing again, but in a different way. There is suffering, it has to be understood. There is the cause of suffering, which has to be eliminated. There is the cessation of suffering, which must be achieved. And there is the path to the cessation of suffering, which must be practiced. So that was the second time he said this. The third time, and this is talking from a very high view, but we'll say it just to finish off what he said. There is suffering, it has to be understood, but there is nothing to understand. There is the cause of suffering, which has to be eliminated, but there is nothing to eliminate. There is the cessation of suffering, which must be attained, but there is nothing to attain. There is the path to the cessation, it must be practiced, but there is nothing to practice. So he said these four noble truths in 3 different ways. And it said that on hearing this, of the 5 ascetics that were listening to him, one of them became enlightened there and then. And the others, they all became his followers. They became the first monks to follow the Buddha. So now we don't want to kind of run before we can walk, because we need to understand these very profound truths at the level that we're at. So the first times that he said these 4 noble truths, I think you could say that is sort of to accept the fact that there is suffering. Because a lot of the time we're kind of in denial about this. You know, if we look at suffering, some of it is very obvious. Of course, we can see that we suffer when we get ill, or when we get old, when we die, or we might suffer from heat or cold. These are all very kind of obvious methods or modes of suffering that we come into contact with. But there are much more subtle ones. Also, there's the suffering of losing your reputation or your livelihood. There's so many different kinds of suffering that we might experience. And those are still quite obvious. Even on a worldly level, you know, we're all suffering with the pandemic, or some people have actually died, you know, so there's all these very obvious ways that we suffer. But if we look more deeply into it, look at the things that give us happiness, that we think make us happy. New clothes, maybe a nice new car, possessions, nice watch, all of these things that we crave, we go after, or just nice food. But all of those worldly kind of pleasures have suffering inbuilt. Why? Because they don't last. So whatever you get in the worldly way, it never lasts, does it? Whatever. Also, there's a worry about it. Supposing you have this beautiful new car, and then it gets scratched, or you damage it, or you crash it. Then it's such suffering. So even the things that we think give us pleasure have that kind of seed of suffering lurking in there somewhere, that more subtle kind of suffering. Or even if we're just enjoying ourselves, thinking, this is great, I wish this could go on forever, but we know that it's not going to go on forever. We know that, in a certain amount of time, might not be very long at all, that it's going to end, whatever that was giving us such pleasure. So we know that, deep down we know that. On the other hand, if you think, well, when you are suffering, when you say, for example, you're extremely cold or something, and then you come into a nice warm room, then you're quite glad that things are changing. Basically, that's the suffering of change. So there's many, many forms of that. So these are all things that we can contemplate. First of all, we need to acknowledge that there is suffering, and the different kinds of suffering. Then we need to look at the causes. So what's causing this suffering? Some of it we can't do much about, but we can change the way we experience it. If a group of people are experiencing something, let's say a storm or something like that, some people will, they just get wrapped up and they'll go out in it and it's not such a big deal. Other people will be like, so much suffering, they really don't want to go into that. So we all experience things in different ways, even if it's the same thing. So that's because we have a different way of thinking, how we see things. So the causes lie within us. Basically, we don't really understand what's going on. We're quite ignorant about what's going on. We don't understand that we're creating this suffering by the way we relate to things. So, for example, let's say I get something nice, ice cream. I like ice cream. So now I've got an ice cream. Pretend I've got an ice cream. This is just lovely. I'm eating my ice cream. But something happens to the ice cream. Maybe it melts, or I drop it. Now I've got no ice cream. Before I had this ice cream, I was enjoying it so much. And now it's dropped on the floor. I can't pick it up. It's ice cream. It's already melting. It's dirty. And the shop's closed now. I can't even get another one. Such suffering. Now, where's that suffering coming from? Is it the ice cream's fault? It's not the ice cream's fault, is it? It's the way I'm relating to it. I was enjoying it. I had some. Now I can't because it's gone, it's melted. And the way I'm relating to it is like that's what's causing the suffering. It's my craving, my wanting, my desire. Craving for things, clinging to things. Instead of thinking, okay, well it was nice while it lasted. It's not the end of the world. I'll probably get another ice cream at some point. It's no big deal. So that's now we're looking at the causes of our suffering is coming from us, not the thing, not the object. Same as if you had a beautiful house or a beautiful car, or something went wrong with it, or somebody stole it. And then, oh no, devastated, oh, somebody's taken my car or my bike or whatever it is. So yes, of course, you had it and now you haven't got it. But again, it's not the end of the world, and we create so much more suffering by behaving as if it was, by clinging to it. At least we have our life, we have really what's important to us. The car or the bike is not the end of the world. So the way we relate to it will decide how much suffering we have because of that. So he found that, really we can do something about that. So we know something about accepting that there is suffering in many different shapes and forms. And we know that largely it's to do with ourselves, of how we relate to outer objects or people. It works with people as well. The same thing is true of relationships. Oh, I've got this wonderful husband or this wonderful wife or girlfriend or whoever it is. Oh, I didn't like the way they were looking at so-and-so. That looks a bit like maybe they might be unfaithful to me. Or, so no sooner is the attachment. Now, he's not saying that there shouldn't be this love and this warmth between beings, but it's the grasping, it's the attachment, the desire that causes the problem. Basically, it comes down to 3 root causes of ignorance, just general not understanding, aggression or hatred or aversion, and then the flip side of that is attachment, desire, craving, whether it's for a person, for a thing, for a position, all of these things, what we can work with, get to the root of, and modify, and learn from. And then we come to, well, is it possible to get to the bottom of this, to not have this suffering that comes because of that? Yes, it is. The Buddha knew it was, because he'd achieved that through being liberated from this wrong view, these wrong ways of seeing. That's what liberation is. So when you liberate yourself through your own efforts, enlightenment didn't come like out of the blue. You have to work for it. You have to really examine things, meditate on things, study things, test things, investigate. It's not just sort of some miraculous instant thing that happens. You have to put effort, a lot of effort, maybe over many lifetimes. You have to be in it for the long haul. Anyway, he proved to himself that it was possible to be able to reach this enlightened, liberated way of being, liberated from ignorance and attachment, grasping and aversion and hatred. And then the way to do that is the path to follow in order to attain that and to be free of it, to be free of the deluded views and ways of seeing. So that's what the Buddha, proved for himself, that it was possible. And so when he went on his travels, people would come and he would talk to them and teach them according to how he was able to benefit them, whatever level they were at, whatever was appropriate for them to hear. And so that's what he went around doing for many years, and people would start to come to him, and some of them would become what we now call monks. They would, in fact, I think what we'll do is we'll leave it there for now, because that's a whole, we want to go into that in more detail. And I think what would be useful now would be to maybe meditate a little bit on the Four Noble Truths. So with all this talk about suffering, you might think, well, why are Buddhists going on about suffering all the time? They must be a really miserable lot of people. But that's not the case. The reason why the Buddha went into it so deeply is because he wanted to get out of it. And to get out of something, you need to understand what's going on. Imagine, for example, you're in a prison and you want to get out of the prison. So then you'd have to see how the prison is constructed, where the doors are, is it possible to tunnel out? Maybe you could do something about the guard, what time does the guard come on? You'd really go to great lengths to understand everything about this prison, not because you want to stay in it, but because you want to get out of it. So that's why we go into suffering, because we want to be free of it. And not only for ourselves, but all beings. The Buddha saw that we don't have to be suffering in this way. And then such great compassion arose when he became enlightened. He wanted that for everybody. And to do whatever he could to help all beings realize their true nature. That's why he distilled it into the Four Noble Truths, are really the basis for all the subsequent teachings. And in all the schools of Buddhism that came after that, how it developed, they all have the Four Noble Truths at their root. So I think this is a good place to stop for a little, maybe a little meditation, contemplation about these before we go on into the next course. And also at this point we can have a little taste bit now, meditating together, and then you can work with it until the next course, apply it, test it. Is it useful? Is it not useful? Is it true? Is it not true? How does it apply to your own life? How does it apply to my life? What situation? Attachment? You have to be kind of honest with yourself for it to be really useful, and see how it applies in your own situation, your own life, and whether it works. So I think we have a little, a mini sort of meditation. Now usually, sometimes when we talk about meditation, we think, oh, you just zone out and relax and kind of like, almost like you're going to sleep. Well, we know that the word Buddha means the awakened one. So if we want to wake up, we don't want to be going to sleep. That's why we should keep our eyes a bit open when we meditate. They don't have to be wide-eyed, but just open so you're not going to get drowsy. You want to be sharp. Sharpen your awareness. Of course we need to be relaxed, and what we can do is to alternate between relaxing, resting, but with awareness, just resting without any particular focus. And then when the mind starts to get busy with whatever random thoughts, that's when rather than just the mind getting busy with any old stuff, focus on what we actually want to look at, which in this case is the Four Noble Truths. So we'll try that together. So we'll start off by getting into a good posture, because to wake up, we need to be sort of alert in our posture, relaxed but alert. So you let go of any tension, but you maintain a good posture. You can sit cross-legged or on a chair. If you're sitting on a chair, you need to not be leaning on the back of the chair. You need to support your own back. This is very good for you. Not only when you're meditating, it will make your back stronger. And just imagine the top of your head growing up towards the light, so it just kind of naturally, holistically straightens out your spine. And when your spine's straight, the energy can flow more smoothly around your body. Let the eyes rest, looking downwards, but open. You can have your hands on your knees if you like, or in your lap. Usually they say the right on top of the left and the thumb tips touching. Just relax your belly, allow your breathing to come from your belly as well as your lungs. You know, you can breathe with your whole body, and that way of breathing is very natural. Let go of any tension, any sort of any tightness. You just let it all go. Relax your belly, use your diaphragm and your lungs as well. Breathing in and out normally, deeply. And just allow your body to relax while maintaining the good posture. And let your mind settle, letting go of the usual habitual thinking. Just let it all come and go. You don't need to block anything, you just let it come and go without following it, without engaging. Body and mind relaxed and alert. And as your mind settles, becoming more peaceful, clearer, just resting in that clarity, not trying to make it do anything, you're just resting in its natural state. Being here and now. And then we'll turn our mind to reflecting on what we've been discussing, the Four Noble Truths, and we'll do them one by one. So the truth of suffering. Looking into suffering, both the obvious kind of suffering and the more subtle type of suffering, such as what might be found in things that give us pleasure. And just allowing the mind to test, investigate, look into it. Think of circumstances in your own life. Your own mind. Then relax the mind again. Let it go. Let it rest in spacious awareness, resting at ease. And now looking into our mind, looking for the causes of suffering, the three root causes of ignorance, aversion or hatred or anger, and then the opposite, which is attachment, desire, craving. Those three root causes which subdivide into various types of selfishness, such as greed, pride, many subdivisions, but all coming from the roots of aversion or craving and ignorance. Do we have these? And do they cause us suffering? And relax the mind again, letting go. Resting. Mind and body together here and now. Unperturbed by whatever you discover. There's no need to beat yourself up. This is something to be objective about, like a scientist looking through a microscope. You're just ascertaining what's there, what isn't there, is it true, is it not true. Being objective. And now we'll look at the cessation of suffering, whether it's the cessation, the stopping of it, the escape from it. Because if we know the causes come from the mind, the solutions also come from the mind. So whatever negative afflictions, mind afflictions we've had can be removed by adopting virtuous actions, virtuous ways of thinking. Our mistakes can be rectified. Our not knowing can become knowing. Our ignorance can become wisdom. And relax the mind again, letting go. Just resting in non-referential awareness. And then the last of the Four Noble Truths, the path out of suffering. The path to liberation. By seeing things as they are, by letting go of our unvirtuous actions and negative thinking, negative actions, by adopting virtuous actions of body and speech and mind. We can realize our true nature, let go of suffering and realize who we truly are. The Buddha taught that all beings have the potential to become awakened, to become as Buddha. So that was a little mini session of how to work with the truths in our meditation. So we kind of alternate between relaxing and resting the mind, and then examining. You can spend longer on it than we just did, but I just wanted to give you a taste of how to work with it and go into it. You know, it doesn't have to be any set time. Whatever comes up you can work with. Some days it might be longer, some days shorter. And not always only just when you're sitting meditating, it's also when you're going about your daily life, seeing, that's suffering, or that's the way out of suffering, you know, actually testing it for yourself. We're very fortunate because the Buddha did all the hard work. We now have a blueprint. We know it's possible because the Buddha became enlightened, and many other people have after him. So it is possible. We know that. But we need to know it, not just, we read it and we heard that it's possible. We really need to know it. And that's why we meditate, because you can read as much as you can and go to many, many teachings and hear lots of things, but until you bring it into your own experience, it will remain just a dry intellectual thing. It doesn't become in your own experience, your own kind of heart. So that's why it's so important to give it space, give it time, meditate on it, contemplate, meditate, apply it. Then you can test it and see, is it true? Does it work? Does it not work? And then you know for yourself. So I think we'll leave it there for now, and we'll carry on with the next course. We'll go into further aspects of the path, and how the path in terms of how Buddhism came from that time to now, and also the path in terms of our own path. So two aspects of the path, the big path and little path, and how they converge. So for now we'll leave it, and we'll I hope that you will use it and to really come to understand something of what's going on. Don't be impatient also. These are very profound truths, you know, it'll take time. And the more you go into it, the more you understand. And it goes on for the whole of your life. In fact, many lives. If you understand many lives, then it doesn't just stop here. This is quite radical, but in a good way. So also, you know, if you have any questions that come up, first of all, I would recommend looking at them yourself, really investigate, because many times you can find the answer yourself. That's why we meditate. It was, let's really look into these things. But if over a period of time you still don't have any answers, then by all means you can email me. I can't guarantee that I will know the answer either, but I'll do my best. And then it'll come up in subsequent courses. We can discuss things in that way, because obviously you're not here to discuss it with person to person, but we can still get around that by sending in your questions. Just email me and I'll do my best. So now let's dedicate the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings, so we share whatever goodness has come with all beings. And I'll say it in English first, and then we can say it in Tibetan afterwards. So through the wholesomeness of this practice, may all the mental defilements be overcome, and may all beings be liberated from the ocean of samsaric suffering, stirred by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And in the Tibetan, O sanam de tam chezik pani, topne nye pedanam pamchene, jegana chi bala drupaye, sipe sole doa doa sho. So enjoy your investigations, your meditations, your adventure into inner space. And as I said before, if you want to ask any questions, just email me after having gone through them yourself first. I'm the last resort, really. So I hope you found something of use and that you can enjoy your practice. And we'll see you in about a month's time.